Minister Mellis, would you like to say anything on this subject? Because you have done a remarkable job in terms of decentralizing and devolution and involving the various provinces and so on. I don't know whether you'd like to say something on this same question.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Dr. Dervish, and as I say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the fact that the last great crisis in Turkey was managed by this man here, and since then Turkey has done very, very well, is proof enough of the way that the crisis, the macro crisis in Turkey, was managed in a sustainable manner. But Turkey is Turkey, and Ethiopia is obviously Ethiopia. So what fits Turkey is unlikely to fit the circumstances of Ethiopia. You can have general principles, for example, that inflation should be reasonable, and more important, should be stable. I think it could be quite high so long as it's stable. It's the volatility that creates an environment where decision makers, private and public, find it difficult to predict what the outcome is likely to be in the future. And in the end, macro policy should not be, as Dr. Kamal Dervish has said, should not be seen as a technocratic issue. In the end, it's about people's lives, and people have to make choices. They may not be aware of all the graphs and diagrams and so on, but the outcome of policies affect their livelihoods. And I agree with him that this can be explained, should be explained in simple terms, because at the heart of macroeconomic policy, there are simple, fundamental truths that affect people's livelihoods. So involvement of the population, both in designing and implementing macro policy, is a very important issue.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Are there any further questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Mahader from Ethiopia. My question is to Prime Minister Meles. It has been said that our world, especially LDCs, are suffering from international structure, especially LDCs. And then there is this financial shadow system. What do you think LDCs should do to overcome this financial shadow problem and then international structural problem?
Well, there are two sides. I think there are two sides to this so-called shadow financial system. There is the supply side, which is coming from developing countries, including LDCs, tax evasion, mispricing of imports and exports, corruption. These are the sources of the funds that go into this shadow system. And developing countries, LDCs in particular, can do a lot to clean up their house and make sure that there isn't much by way of supply from our countries. But it's challenging, especially when there is a demand side. And the demand side comes from the so-called tax havens, and many of the financial centers in the world have their connections, direct and indirect, with this shadow system. And that creates a pull factor which tends to encourage people in LDCs to export money illegally. So we need to address it from both ends, but we cannot wait for the advanced countries and the tax havens to tackle the problem until we cannot wait for them to do so. We have to start on our own, do as much as we can, and then ask our partners to help in stemming the tide of corruption and ill-gotten money, which is the basis of the shadow system.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Yes, please. And after you, I'll ask you to ask your question, and then.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm from Ethiopia. My name is Samuel. Ethiopia most of the time resists to compromise its policies, and I think it's successful in succeeding and resisting in protecting itself from the global economic crisis. What lesson could LCD countries, other countries, learn from Ethiopia? This question is for Prime Minister Meles Zenawi.
Harris from the IMF to. Can I have the microphone for him, please?
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, this is a question for your opinion on something. I listened very carefully to what you said about the macroeconomic orthodoxy, the excessive focus on stability, perhaps at the expense of growth. I think we've seen in the last 10 years that the growth performance, including of LDCs, has improved quite substantially. Part of the reason why this crisis was not as catastrophic as we all feared it might be was that the countries were in a better position to react, in part because of this better performance. But what I'd like to ask your opinion about is the following. Could it be that we have had too much focus on just getting the macroeconomic fundamentals right to set the growth process in place without spending enough time thinking about what kind of growth we want to have? So that the growth that we've had has not generated the kind of employment and increased resistance to shocks, to vulnerabilities that we would have expected. So that the growth that we've had has not generated the improvement in the MDG indicators that we would have expected. Is that perhaps the source of the problem? Is that where we need to spend time thinking on how to make growth more, for lack of a better word, pro-poor? Could that be it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'm not sure whether we should save that for the debate in the next session. If you don't mind, Prime Minister, we'll save that for later. Mr. Timosi, did you have your hand? Okay, the last question, please.
Thank you. Again, to Prime Minister Meles. You've been quite active over the last 10 years in debates and discussions of the architecture of a global system. And I know your frustration that donor countries and development partners are not willing to provide the policy space for poor countries like Ethiopia. But I'm wondering whether or not you've seen any form of improvement over the years or lately in providing the space that you've been asking. Is there any change? Thank you.
It's one thing to ask partners to give those of us in the LDCs some space to design our own policies. It's always important because they have a huge say in what happens in our countries. But it is also possible to take policy space, to snatch it, as it were, on our own. And it's not just governments who can help us in creating some space for ourselves. Jomo here has been a friend of Ethiopia. He has done his very best through the United Nations system to create the understanding, to create the environment for such a space. He mentioned Joe Stiglitz, who was the Vice President of the World Bank and who contributed a lot in giving us some shelter, some protection to design our own policy. But in the end, we have to pay the price for policy space. And Ethiopia has paid the price for getting its own policy space. On average, we get less than half of the assistance that the average African country gets in per capita terms, in spite of the fact that we are among the poorest in Africa. I think that's worthwhile. Money alone is not going to be decisive in promoting development. If you don't have the right policies, you will not have development. And therefore, if you have to trade some money, some assistance for the policy space that you crave, then you can carve a little bit of space for yourself. I think that's what we have done in Ethiopia. Our policies are not the orthodox ones. And some of our friends have not been happy with them. But in the end, I think we have had good growth. More importantly, I think we have had good quality growth. Good quality in the sense that it's been poor growth. The data show that in terms of the Gini coefficient, Ethiopia has the lowest in the continent. And that's clear indication that our growth has been poor. So I think it would be fair to complain that we're not getting adequate policy space, but it will be also important to see if we are doing, each one of us are doing enough to carve out some space for ourselves. And I think Ethiopia has done some good work in that regard.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. We have to adjourn to our other session. We have crept into the time of the next press meeting, so I apologize for terminating, and I apologize to Mr. Harris for discouraging Prime Minister Meles from answering your question. I want to thank Prime Minister Meles and Dr. Kamal Dervish for their graciousness in attending, participating in this press conference. I would like to invite all of you, I know some of you from the press have to stay behind to do your other work, but please, for those of you who are interested, we are now going to start a session at 6:15 at the Tofani Hall. Thank you very much for your presence here.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for our participants.